Analyses and explications of the film, IT. Welcome to Derry, 2025. The film IT. Welcome to Derry serves as a direct prequel to the contemporary IT film duology, plunging us deeper into the corrosive history of Derry, Maine, in the year 1962. This analysis will explore the narrative, themes, and significant expansions this installment brings to the Stephen King universe. The film's critical reception, noted as generally positive with a certified fresh score, stems from its successful atmospheric construction and performances, though some critiques of its plotting are worth examining within the context of its ambitious world-building. The core premise of IT. Welcome to Derry ingeniously shifts focus from the Losers Club to the family lineage of one of its key members, Mike Hanlon. By centering on Will Hanlon and his family's arrival in Derry, the film immediately establishes a tragic dramatic irony. Audiences familiar with the later films understand that this move condemns the Hanlons to a cycle of trauma, effectively making Will's son, Mike, the future archivist of Derry's horrors. This generational curse is a central pillar of the film's emotional weight. The plot catalyst is the disappearance of a local boy, Matty Clements, which coincides with the Hanlons' arrival. This event triggers the town's latent malevolence, suggesting that Pennywise's cycles of feeding are not strictly bound to a 27-year calendar, but can be stirred by specific acts of fear or loss. The investigation into Matty's fate becomes the conduit through which a new group of children, and some adults, begin to pierce Derry's veil of normalcy. A bold and defining narrative strand is the introduction of a military subplot led by General Francis Shaw. This plotline significantly expands the IT mythology beyond the supernatural and into the realm of institutional conspiracy. Shaw's quest for a weapon during the Cold War heightens the paranoia of the era and introduces a chilling new concept: that powerful figures are not only aware of the entity but seek to harness it. This directly comments on themes of corrupting power and ambition, mirroring the human evils that fester alongside Pennywise. The film's exploration of Pennywise's origins provides crucial new mythology. The introduction of Bob Gray, the human carnival performer from 1908, is a masterstroke. It reframes Pennywise's favored clown guise not as a random choice, but as a deliberate and perhaps even respectful form of mimicry. The film suggests the entity may have been fascinated or influenced by Gray's particular brand of performative cruelty, adding a layer of unsettling specificity to its evil. This move away from a purely cosmic, unknowable terror towards one with a traceable, human-adjacent history deepens the lore. Themes of social horror are rigorously explored, continuing the franchise's tradition of using monster terror to reflect real-world anxieties. The film delves into institutional racism within the military and the town, particularly through the experiences of the Hanlon family. This prejudice is shown as another form of feeding for Derry, a human evil that weakens the community's resolve and makes it more susceptible to the supernatural predator. The corrupt police force, led by Chief Bowers, reinforces the novel's core idea that the adults of Derry are complicit, whether through active malice or willful ignorance. A key theme is the power of memory and guilt, exemplified by characters like Lily Bainbridge. Haunted by her father's death, her personal trauma becomes a beacon for Pennywise. The film posits that unprocessed grief and shame are open wounds that the entity can infect. The narrative argues that confronting these painful memories, however agonizing, is the first step towards resistance, prefiguring the Losers Club's own battles with their personal fears. The ensemble of new characters provides a fresh lens on Derry's curse. By following a group unrelated to the future losers, the film demonstrates the pervasive, cyclical nature of the town's evil. It shows that the battle against Pennywise is a constant, generational struggle, and that the Losers Club was neither the first nor necessarily the last group to confront it. This amplifies the tragedy and scale of Derry's history. Performances are a standout element, with Bill Skarsgård's return as Pennywise offering new nuances. The influence of the Bob Gray persona may inform a slightly different cadence or theatricality to the clown's menace, a subtle evolution of the performance. The younger cast members effectively portray the vulnerability and nascent courage of children facing the unimaginable, while adult performances like Chris Chalk's ground the horror in tangible human emotion and conflict. The film's stylistic choices firmly root it in the early 1960s while paying homage to the aesthetic of the 2017 film. The use of the hauntingly cheerful song, "A Smile and a Ribbon," by patience and prudence over the opening establishes an immediate dissonance, contrasting suburban innocence with underlying dread. The cinematography captures both the idyllic surface of Derry and the grotesque, decaying spaces beneath it, maintaining the visual language of the franchise while exploring new locales. Connections to the wider Stephen King multiverse are deliberate and rewarding. The appearance of a young Dick Halloran is a profound link. Portrayed as an airman with burgeoning psychic abilities, his presence directly ties the film's events to the mythology of The Shining and Dr. Sleep. It suggests that his shining may have drawn him to Derry or made him susceptible to its horrors, and his survival likely informs his later understanding of the supernatural. The cameo by a teenage Beverly Marsh is a potent bridge to the future. Seeing her in the background, already living under the thumb of her abusive father, reinforces the cyclical misery of Derry and creates a poignant moment of foreshadowing. It visually confirms that the losers are growing up in this same toxic ecosystem, awaiting the catalyst that will bring them together. The film also deepens our understanding of Derry's corrupt foundation. Characters like Chief Bowers embody the town's systemic rot, showing that the human evil that partners with Pennywise is entrenched in positions of authority. This reinforces the idea that defeating the entity requires not just battling a monster, but also confronting the collective societal sickness it cultivates. In its expanded mythology, the film introduces the concept that Pennywise's influence or physical presence may be more geographically extensive than previously thought. The military's interest implies there may be historical records or incidents beyond Derry's borders linked to the entity, suggesting a longer, more complex history of interaction between this ancient evil and human institutions. The film's pacing and structure, which some critics found occasionally scattered, can be viewed as an attempt to juggle multiple perspectives. The children's investigation, the military conspiracy, and the adult dramas of grief and prejudice. This mosaic approach reflects the town itself, a collection of interlocking stories and secrets, all feeding the same central evil. Ultimately, Welcome to Derry succeeds as an expansion that feels both necessary and innovative. It avoids being a simple retread by exploring new historical and institutional dimensions of the mythos. It enriches the background of the future Losers Club while standing as its own compelling story about a different set of victims and resistors in Derry's long, bloody history. The film posits that Derry has always been a hunting ground, and that courage, however fleeting, has always been the only answer to its timeless, shape-shifting fear. The film Welcome to Derry serves as a meticulously crafted prequel to the recent cinematic adaptations of Stephen King's seminal novel. This analysis will explore the film's intricate narrative layers, its thematic depth, and its significant expansion of the established mythology. The generally positive critical reception highlights the film's atmospheric success and compelling performances, though its complex plotting invites a deeper examination of its ambitions. By choosing to center the narrative on the Hanlon family's arrival in 1962, the film immediately establishes a profound sense of tragic inevitability. This focus on Will Hanlon provides essential context for his son Mike's future role as the reluctant guardian of Derry's dark history. The move fundamentally recontextualizes the entire franchise as a generational saga of trauma and resilience against an ancient evil. The disappearance of Maddie Clements acts not merely as a plot device, but as a symbolic awakening of the town's dormant hunger. This event suggests that Pennywise's feeding cycles are influenced by specific emotional catalysts within the community. The ensuing investigation draws together an entirely new ensemble of characters, showcasing how Derry's corruption touches every generation. General Francis Shaw's military subplot introduces a thrilling new dimension to the lore, moving the conflict into the realm of Cold War paranoia. This narrative thread posits a terrifying institutional awareness of the entity, framing it as a potential weapon of mass destruction. The ambition to control such primordial fear represents the ultimate human folly, mirroring the town's historical complicity. Exploring Pennywise's origins through the figure of Bob Gray offers a fascinating psychological layer to the entity's nature. This backstory implies a moment of convergence where an ancient cosmic force adopted a very specific human mask. The choice of the clown persona becomes less random and more a deliberate, perhaps even aesthetic, selection by the being. The film's commitment to social horror is evident in its unflinching portrayal of racism and systemic prejudice within both the military and the town. These human evils are presented not as background, but as active sustenance for Derry's supernatural rot. The Hanlon family's experience becomes a direct lens through which to view this endemic sickness. Characters burdened by personal guilt, like Lily Bainbridge, illustrate the film's core psychological mechanics. Their unresolved trauma functions as a beacon, attracting the shape-shifting predator that feeds on such emotional residue. The narrative argues that memory itself is a battleground where survival is determined. This new ensemble of characters provides a vital demonstration of Derry's cyclical predation. Their struggle proves that the Losers Club was a singularly successful iteration of a recurring phenomenon. This perspective magnifies the town's tragedy, showing countless untold stories of resistance and defeat. Bill Skarsgård's return to the role brings a refined menace informed by the newly established Bob Gray mythology. His performance may now carry a hint of studied theatricality, a clown perfecting his craft over centuries. The younger cast members deliver authentic portrayals of childhood innocence eroding under supernatural pressure. The film's aesthetic meticulously reconstructs the early 60s while maintaining the visual grammar of Muschietti's earlier films. Period-accurate details create a veneer of normalcy that makes the encroaching grotesquerie even more jarring. The contrast between sunny suburban streets and hidden, filth-encrusted lairs remains powerfully effective. Dick Halloran's inclusion is a masterstroke of universe building, suggesting his psychic abilities might have drawn him to this nexus of terror. His presence creates a tangible bridge to the Overlook Hotel's own malignant history. This connection implies a shared ecosystem of supernatural evil within King's multiverse. Beverly Marsh's brief appearance is a devastating piece of narrative foreshadowing, confirming she is already trapped in her own domestic horror. This glimpse reinforces the film's theme of cyclical abuse, both mundane and monstrous, that defines life in Derry. It reminds us the losers were always there, waiting to find each other. The corruption embodied by figures like Chief Bowers is shown to be a foundational pillar of the town's power structure. This institutional evil operates in sinister symbiosis with the entity lurking below. Challenging one ultimately requires confronting the other, a truth future generations will learn. The military's interest suggests a broader historical footprint for Pennywise's activities beyond Derry's borders. Classified records and buried reports could hint at similar phenomena elsewhere, framed through a pragmatic and terrifyingly immoral lens. This expands the threat from a local curse to a potential global one. The film's narrative structure, weaving multiple perspectives, mirrors the dispersed and insidious nature of the fear it cultivates. Each storyline represents a different facet of the community's vulnerability. Their eventual convergence illustrates how the entity manipulates the entire town as a single organism. Pennywise's relationship with Derry is further complicated by this prequel, showing the town as both a feeding ground and a deliberate construction. The entity's long-term influence on the town's development, from its founding tragedies to its social decay, is implied to be far more active and calculated. The motif of the carnival, introduced through Bob Gray's origin, provides a new symbolic framework. The carnival represents illusion, fleeting joy, and hidden menace, a perfect metaphor for its hunting strategy. Derry itself becomes a permanent, twisted carnival where the price of admission is one's fear. The film delves into the concept of inherited trauma with potent clarity, particularly through the Hanlon lineage. Will's experiences directly seed the obsessive research that will consume his son Mike decades later. This turns the family's story into a relay race of dread, passed from father to son. Lily Bainbridge's personal haunting by her father's death showcases Pennywise's expert manipulation of very human grief. The entity does not simply show monsters. It crafts personalized narratives of guilt and loss from the raw material of its victims' own memories. This makes its threat profoundly intimate. General Shaw's mission represents the ultimate failure of rational, militaristic thinking when faced with a primordial force. His attempts to weaponize fear misunderstand its fundamental nature, which is to consume and corrupt any who seek to wield it. This subplot is a classic King tale of hubris. The production design excels in creating a Derry that feels both nostalgically familiar and unsettlingly alien. Key locations from the later films are seen in their earlier, slightly different states, creating a haunting sense of temporal dissonance for the attentive viewer. The town is a character in flux. The use of period-specific music, beyond the opening theme, grounds the horror in a very real cultural moment. Upbeat pop songs ironically underscore scenes of mounting dread, highlighting the pervasive denial that defines Derry's populace. The soundtrack becomes a tool of dramatic irony. The dynamics within the new group of children contrast meaningfully with the Losers Club. Their bonds, alliances, and failures provide a different blueprint for how youth confronts this evil, with likely less success. Their story underscores that friendship and courage are the rare exception, not the rule. The film explores the idea of seeing and belief through characters with varying levels of awareness. Some, like Halloran, have a psychic sense. Others, like the children, have the unclouded perception of youth. The adults, for the most part, embody willful blindness. This spectrum of belief dictates vulnerability. Pennywise's manifestations in this era might reflect the specific fears of the early 1960s, including Cold War anxieties and shifting social norms. The entity's shapeshifting is always a dark mirror to the collective psyche of its time, and the film likely mines this period for unique horrific imagery. The relationship between time and fear is a central philosophical concern. As a being that exists across millennia, Pennywise perceives its human prey within a vast, slow cycle. The film's prequel status allows us to see just one small arc in that endless, patient pattern of predation and hibernation. Chief Bauer's corruption is likely shown to have its own generational element, foreshadowing the vicious bully his son will become. This echoes the film's theme that evil, both human and otherwise, is a self-perpetuating cycle within Derry's boundaries, passed down like a toxic inheritance. The military presence introduces the possibility of advanced technology clashing with ancient magic. This conflict between the rational, scientific world and the archaic, supernatural one creates unique tension. How does one contain, measure, or fight a creature that feeds on subjective emotion? Lily's journey from guilt-stricken victim to potential resistor charts a crucial emotional arc. Her process of confronting her painful memories serves as a prototype for the therapeutic confrontation that will later define the Losers' strategy. Healing personal trauma becomes an act of defiance. The film likely enriches the mythology of the Deadlights, the true form of it, possibly offering new visuals or insights into this cosmic horror. Any glimpse into this area deepens the understanding of Pennywise as merely a comforting, comprehensible mask for an utterly incomprehensible reality. The economic and social stratification of Derry is probably used as another vector for the horror. The differences between the affluent and the working-class neighborhoods could influence how the entity manifests, tailoring its nightmares to the specific anxieties bred by economic disparity and social status. The concept of ritual and belief is potent within the IT mythology. The film may introduce earlier, failed rituals attempted by townsfolk or other groups to banish the entity, providing historical precedent for the Losers' own eventual, more successful stand against it. The sewer and drainage system of Derry, so central to the later films, is shown in a potentially different state of construction or decay. These subterranean spaces are the literal arteries of the town's horror, and seeing their earlier configuration adds a chilling geographical history to the terror. The film's climax likely involves a confrontation that, while impactful for our new characters, must ultimately preserve the status quo for the future timeline. This creates a unique narrative tension where victory is necessarily partial, temporary, or pyrrhic, cementing the tragic cycle. The aftermath of the film's events would logically sow the seeds for the Derry of 1989. Specific tragedies, cover-ups, or lingering fears born in 1962 could directly influence the environment in which the young losers will later grow up and eventually face their own summer of fear. The ethical dilemma of the military plotline raises stark questions. If a powerful entity exists, is it morally justifiable for a government to try to use it against its enemies, regardless of the cost? This plot holds a dark mirror to real-world historical arms races and unethical experimentation. The role of folklore and local legend within Derry is undoubtedly expanded. Whispered stories about Bob Gray, or the old carnival, half-remembered tragedies, and forbidden places all form an oral history that is both a warning and a kind of sustenance for the entity, which thrives in narrative. The film's color palette and lighting design probably distinguish it from the warmer, autumn-hued 1988 of the first film. A different seasonal setting or a distinct visual approach would help establish this as a distinct chapter while maintaining a cohesive cinematic universe for the franchise. Pennywise's manipulation of adults is often more subtle than his terrorizing of children. The film can explore how he cultivates the town's corrupt authorities through promises, fears, or perhaps even shared hallucinations, binding them into a silent pact that ensures his feeding grounds remain protected. The psychological impact on survivors is a key theme. Those who glimpse the truth but are not consumed, like a young Halloran or Will Hanlon, must carry that knowledge forward. Their lives are forever altered, burdened by a truth they can never fully share without being deemed insane. The film reinforces the idea that Derry is geographically and spiritually unique, a thin place where dimensions bleed together. The rituals of the earlier settlers, hinted at in the novel, might be visually or narratively referenced, suggesting a foundational catastrophe that invited or created the entity's presence. The cost of resistance is a recurring theme in King's work. For this 1962 group, the cost may be shown to be unbearably high, explaining why their story was lost to history. Their sacrifice, however, might provide fragmentary clues that indirectly aid the losers decades later. The notion of welcome in the title is deeply ironic. It speaks to the false hospitality of the town, the predatory invitation extended by Pennywise, and the cruel fate of those who arrive hoping for a new beginning. The Hamlins are welcomed only into the belly of the beast. The film's pacing allows for a slow build of dread rather than relentless horror. This approach lets the social and interpersonal tensions simmer, making the supernatural eruptions feel earned and more impactful. The terror is woven into the fabric of daily life before it violently tears through. Contrasts between childhood imagination and adult rationality are crucial. The children's ability to accept the impossible becomes their strength, while the adult's rigid worldview becomes their fatal flaw. The film navigates this liminal space where fantasy and reality catastrophically collide. The ending of the film must balance closure for its own narrative with open-ended dread for the franchise's future. It will likely leave the entity wounded but not destroyed, the town scarred but forgetful, and the audience with a deeper, more melancholy understanding of the endless battle under Derry. The film IT, Welcome to Derry constructs a foundational mythology for the town's cyclical torment, presenting the community as an organism whose very survival depends on a pact with primordial evil. This analysis delves into the sophisticated layers of narrative and theme that position this prequel as a crucial expansion of the IT universe. Its acclaimed atmospheric dread stems from a meticulous exploration of institutional corruption and inherited trauma. By focusing on the Hamlin family's doomed relocation, the narrative masterfully inverts the traditional horror premise of a fresh start, transforming their hope into a sentence of perpetual vigilance for future generations. This specific choice illuminates the deeply entrenched nature of Derry's curse, suggesting it selectively targets or ensnares certain bloodlines to serve its own enduring legend across centuries. The tragic fate awaiting Will Hanlon seeds the profound sense of duty and isolation that will define his son Mike's entire life. Maddie Clement's vanishing act serves as the precise chemical catalyst that destabilizes the fragile peace of a town perpetually on the brink of supernatural eruption. This event is less a random tragedy and more a calculated reawakening, a signal flare that the entity's prolonged slumber has reached its natural conclusion and the hunting season has officially commenced once more. The ensuing investigation conducted by the new ensemble pulls back the mundane veneer of Derry, revealing the intricate clockwork of fear that operates just beneath. General Shaw's covert military operation injects a compelling new variable into the established equation of fear, framing it not just as a monster, but as a strategic asset in a geopolitical stalemate. This ambition to militarize a metaphysical force represents the apex of human arrogance, a chilling parallel to the town's own history of bargaining with darkness for prosperity and power. The subplot posits that the true horror may not be the entity itself, but humanity's relentless desire to harness and weaponize the incomprehensible. The introduction of Bob Gray reframes Pennywise's iconic visage from a random, terrifying form into a deliberate and almost artistic homage, suggesting the entity possesses a perverse sense of theatrical legacy. This human origin story for the clown persona implies a moment of profound convergence where an ancient, shapeless force found a mask that perfectly expressed its cruel sense of humor and predatory intent. The choice becomes a permanent part of its identity, a brand it wears with sinister pride across the decades. Social critiques are woven into the film's very fabric, using the lens of 1960s racism and militarism to expose the human failures that fertilize Derry's soil for supernatural predation. The Hamlin family's experiences are not merely subplot, but are central to understanding how prejudice functions as a low-frequency fear that weakens communal bonds and individual resolve. This systemic bigotry is portrayed as a complementary feeding mechanism for the town's underlying evil, each making the other stronger. Characters haunted by private grief, such as Lily Bainbridge, exemplify the personalized horror engines that Pennywise expertly fuels and exploits. Their unresolved trauma creates a unique emotional signature, a frequency the entity can lock onto and amplify through meticulously crafted hallucinations tailored to their deepest regrets. The film posits that memory is not a passive record, but an active, vulnerable landscape where battles against fear are ultimately won or lost in solitude. This fresh ensemble of protagonists demonstrates the depressingly repetitive nature of Derry's affliction, proving the Losers Club was a remarkable aberration in a long history of failure and forgotten resistance. Their collective struggle serves as a poignant historical footnote, illustrating the countless stories of courage that were ultimately consumed by the town's enforced amnesia, leaving no legacy but silence. Bill Skarsgård's evolved performance likely incorporates a subtler, more studied grotesquerie, informed by the century of performance since adopting the Grey persona. His portrayal may now carry the weight of tradition, a classic monster perfecting its greatest role with each new generation of audience victims. The younger cast members counter this with a raw, believable vulnerability, their fear manifesting as a palpable erosion of childhood's inherent trust in the world. The film's aesthetic meticulously crafts a period-specific authenticity that makes the intrusion of the grotesque feel like a violation of a cherished national memory. The contrast between crisp military uniforms, polished automobiles, and the dripping, primal decay of the entity's lairs creates a powerful visual tension between the ordered world humanity builds and the chaotic, hungry reality that underlies it. Dick Halloran's presence is a stroke of brilliant multiverse engineering, suggesting his shining ability might function as a spiritual homing beacon for places of intense psychic residue. His assignment in Derry becomes a tragic origin story, a first encounter with a scale of evil that will later help him recognize the sickness within the Overlook Hotel. This connection establishes a shared taxonomy of haunted places within King's America. Beverly Marsh's fleeting cameo is a masterclass in narrative economy, a single visual that encapsulates the pervasive, domestic horror breeding within Derry's homes. Seeing her as a teenager, already flinching from an unseen threat, tragically prefigures the specific personal demon she will later confront in the form of her abusive father. It confirms her entire life has been a preparation for a battle she does not yet know exists. The corruption exemplified by Chief Bowers is presented not as individual moral failing, but as a required civic duty within Derry's ecosystem. His role is to manage the town's visible horrors, to steer inquiry away from the impossible, and to maintain the fragile consensus of denial that allows the community to function. He is a bureaucrat of evil, ensuring the entity's feeding does not disrupt the town's operational bottom line. The military's intelligence likely references historical anomalies far beyond Maine's borders, hinting at a global pattern of similar phenomena that have been documented, suppressed, and studied by shadowy agencies. This transforms Pennywise from a local legend into a potential category of existential threat, a type of being whose appearances are sporadic data points on a hidden map of cosmic horror. The film's multi-threaded narrative structure reflects the decentralized nature of the fear it cultivates, with each storyline representing a different artery feeding the central, ancient heart of the town. The convergence of these threads, civil rights, military ambition, childhood curiosity, and adult guilt, demonstrates how the entity manipulates the entire social and emotional spectrum of its hunting ground. Pennywise's long-term symbiosis with Derry is suggested to be a form of deliberate cultivation, where the entity's occasional spectacular feeds are the price for a slower, steady diet of the fear generated by human cruelty and neglect. The town is both its cage and its garden, and it is both prisoner and gardener, a relationship of grotesque mutual dependency. The carnival motif, introduced via Bob Gray, becomes a pervasive metaphor for Derry's entire existence, a place of bright lights, enticing promises, and rigged games where the ultimate prize is one's own terror. The film uses this imagery to suggest that life in Derry is a perpetual performance where everyone is both audience and potential act in the grand Gignall finale. The concept of inherited duty is tragically explored through the Hanlon lineage, where Will's first-hand encounter bequeaths to Mike not just knowledge, but a solitary, life-consuming obligation. This transforms Mike's future role as the Watcher from a choice into a familial destiny, a burden passed down like a genetic trait, making his story one of the franchise's most profound tragedies. Lily Bainbridge's haunting is a precise surgical strike by the entity, which fabricates elaborately personalized narratives from the raw material of her guilt. This showcases Pennywise not as a simple monster, but as a master playwright and director, crafting immersive horror experiences designed to break a specific individual's spirit and maximize the flavor of their fear. General Shaw's mission is a classic Faustian bargain for the Cold War age, seeking a shortcut to supremacy by trafficking with a force that fundamentally consumes ambition itself. His failure is inevitable, a demonstration that the tools of geopolitics, logic, strategy, force, are useless against an enemy that exists within the subjective, emotional realm of its victims. The production design meticulously differentiates this earlier Derry, perhaps showing a town more overtly prosperous yet psychologically brittle, its post-war confidence masking a deeper, older sickness. Familiar locations appear slightly newer, yet somehow just as stained, suggesting the corruption is not in the bricks and mortar, but in the very land they are built upon. The sonic landscape of the film, through its use of period music and diegetic sound, creates a layer of ironic commentary. The cheerful advertisements, the wholesome rock and roll, and the mundane town hall announcements become a soundtrack of willful ignorance, a collective noise meant to drown out the subterranean whispers and the screams that nobody acknowledges. The dynamics within the new group of children provide a fascinating counterpoint to the losers, likely showcasing a group whose bonds are fractured by social pressures, family loyalties, or sheer bad luck. Their potential failure underscores that the losers' profound friendship was their true, magical weapon, a variable the entity historically did not account for. The spectrum of sight, from Halloran's shine to the children's belief to the adult's blindness, defines a character's role in the ecosystem. Those who see are either targets or threats. Those who are blind are the infrastructure, the living scenery of the hunting ground. The film explores the peril and the power inherent in truly looking at Derry. Pennywise's manifestations would logically mirror the nascent fears of the early 60s. Anxieties of nuclear annihilation, the sinister other of communist ideology, and the crumbling facade of traditional American values. The entity becomes a dark historian, its forms cataloging the evolving nightmares of the culture it preys upon. The film philosophically engages with the entity's perception of time, presenting it as a patient sculptor working across centuries, for whom a human life is a brief, vivid brushstroke in a vast and terrible mural. This perspective renders the human struggle heroically futile and tragically beautiful, a repeated, passionate defiance against an uncaring eternity. The Bowers family legacy of brutality is shown as a microcosm of Derry's own pathology, where violence and hatred are taught, nurtured, and passed down as a distorted form of survival skill. This human evil is a self-replicating program that runs parallel to the supernatural one, each justifying the other's existence. The clash between Shaw's technology, listening devices, radiation sensors, firearms, and Pennywise's reality-bending abilities creates a unique genre friction. It poses the question of what happens when the empirical, data-driven world of the mid-20th century collides with a myth that operates on the rules of nightmare and belief. Lily's arc from paralysis by guilt to active confrontation models the internal journey every successful opponent of it must undertake. Her process is the prototype for the emotional labor of facing one's own demons, making her story a crucial keystone in understanding the psychological mechanics of overcoming this particular evil. The film potentially offers new visual or experiential understanding of the Deadlights, not as mere blinding chaos, but as a realm of pure, devouring narrative where every fear that ever was or will be exists simultaneously. This glimpse would deepen the horror by making its true form not just chaotic, but intelligently, cosmically predatory. Derry's economic geography likely plays a role in how fear is distributed and experienced. The fears of the wealthy sitting in their Victorian homes differ from the terrors haunting the trappers in the woods or the workers in the industrial yards. The entity democratically harvests them all, but tailors its approach to the specific anxieties bred by class and circumstance. The history of failed rituals against the entity is fertile ground, suggesting groups before 1962, perhaps the founding settlers, a Victorian secret society, or earlier immigrant communities, attempted banishments using their own cultural frameworks of magic and faith. Their ruins, literal and metaphorical, could litter Derry's history. The sewer system's depiction in an earlier stage of construction or expansion provides a chilling literal metaphor for the town's developing subconscious, a network of dark channels being deliberately built to carry away what is unwanted, only to become the central nervous system of the very horror they were meant to contain. The film's climax must be a victory that feels costly and incomplete, a stalemate that leaves the entity wounded but furious, and the human characters forever scarred, but with a fragile, hard-won knowledge. It is a battle that sets the stage rather than concludes the war, preserving the necessary timeline for the losers' future confrontation. The specific aftermath of the 1962 events would directly sculpt the Derry of 1989, a new unsolved case for the police files, a whispered neighborhood legend about the Hanlons, a sealed military report, all of which contribute to the specific atmospheric poison in which the young losers will breathe and grow. The ethical nightmare of Shaw's mission forces a confrontation with a utilitarian horror. If such a power exists, does the end of national security justify the means of sacrificing an entire town to study and control it? This plotline holds a dark mirror to the Tuskegee experiments or MKUltra, rooting the horror in real-world governmental sin. Derry's oral tradition, its ghost stories, its bad places, its cautionary tales about the canal or the well, is shown not as folklore but as a compromised history, a way the truth leaks out in a form the town can safely dismiss as fantasy. These stories are the entity's mythology, repeated by its prey in a form of unworship. The cinematographic language likely employs a different palette than the later films, perhaps a sharper, more Technicolor-inspired saturation that slowly bleeds into monochrome greens and grays as the horror advances, visually tracing the loss of innocence and the encroachment of a more primal, colorless reality. Pennywise's relationship with the town's power brokers is one of mutual manipulation. He offers them glimpses of their ambitions fulfilled or their rivals destroyed, in exchange for their complicit silence and occasional active assistance. They believe they are using him, a delusion he happily encourages. The survivor's burden is a living death of silence, carrying a catastrophic truth that isolates them from a world that insists on normality. For characters like Will Hanlon, this transforms his entire future into a covert operation, a life spent preparing defenses for a war his son will have to fight. The film can explore the town's foundational geology and indigenous history, suggesting the entity was not an immigrant but a native resident, a malevolent spirit of the place that was awakened or unleashed by the violence of colonial settlement, making Derry's evil a direct consequence of America's original sins. The cost of resistance for this 1962 group is their very place in history. Their story is erased, their bravery unrecorded, their sacrifice meaningless to everyone but them and the entity they briefly thwarted. This erasure is perhaps Pennywise's greatest power and the ultimate horror for those who fight it. The ironic welcome of the title speaks to the town's predatory hospitality, the way it invites new blood to renew itself, and the entity's own grotesque greeting to new sources of fear. It is a welcome to a trap, a dinner invitation where you are the main course. The deliberate pacing allows the social horror to metastasize before the supernatural horror fully erupts, making the eventual monster sightings feel like the inevitable fever dream of a sick society. The real terror is in the quiet moments where prejudice is enacted and injustice is ignored. The collision between the rational adult world and the imaginative child's world is where the entity finds its most potent hunting ground. The film explores this liminal space, the moment when a child's nightmare is confirmed as real and an adult's reality is revealed to be a carefully maintained fiction. The ending likely leaves the entity dormant but stirring, the town already beginning the process of forgetting, and a few key survivors, Halloran, Will Hanlon, forever changed, carrying embers of knowledge into the future. It concludes not with a victory, but with a temporary retreat, a long, held breath before the final scream. The narrative establishes the Hanlon arrival as a pivotal inflection point in Derry's timeline, a deliberate insertion of a conscientious family into a system designed to corrupt or consume such purity. This choice transforms their story from mere backstory into a foundational tragedy, illustrating how the town's evil proactively recruits its future chroniclers and victims through a sinister, predestined logic. Will Hanlon's journey becomes a grim education in a history that is actively hostile to truth-tellers. Maddie Clement's disappearance functions as the town's immune response to a perceived threat of normalcy, an automatic mechanism to reassert the dominant atmosphere of dread. His vanishing is the first domino in a chain reaction designed to test the new arrivals and the existing community, measuring who will see, who will ignore, and who will be driven mad by the gaps in reality. The investigation that follows is less a search for a boy and more an archaeological dig into the living, breathing pathology of Derry itself. General Shaw's operation represents a terrifying evolution in the human relationship with the entity, moving from superstitious fear or ignorant complicity to a clinical, strategic assessment. His perspective frames Pennywise as a bioweapon or a psychological warfare asset, a calculation that tragically underestimates the prey-predator dynamic. This subplot explores the horror of institutional rationality attempting to cage the irrational, an endeavor doomed from its first breath. Bob Gray's legacy provides Pennywise with a rich reservoir of human cruelty to emulate, suggesting the entity's forms are not merely scary shapes but curated expressions of historic human malice. The clown persona becomes a refined artifact, a tradition of terror passed down through the decades, with each performance building upon the last. This connection implies it learns from humanity, adopting and perfecting our own invented horrors. The film's dissection of 1960s social structures uses the supernatural as a magnifying glass, focusing intense heat on the fractures of race, class, and authority until they combust. The Hamlin family's struggle is a direct confrontation with a segregated reality both above and below ground, their dual battle making them exemplary targets. This systemic horror is shown to be the entity's preferred habitat, a cultural petri dish where its own brand of fear can proliferate exponentially. Lily Bainbridge's psychological torment is engineered by Pennywise with the precision of a master torturer, each hallucination a custom-built prison from the bricks of her own regret. Her haunting demonstrates the entity's deep access to personal memory, its ability to not just mimic loved ones, but to restage and corrupt defining moments of loss. Her path to resistance is the core emotional journey, a blueprint for reclaiming one's narrative from a being that feeds on tragic stories. This new ensemble's inevitable fragmentation or failure serves a crucial mythos purpose, highlighting the alchemical rarity of the losers' bond. Their probable demise or dissolution underscores that friendship alone is insufficient. It requires a specific, resilient trust and a shared willingness to stare into the abyss together. Their story is the rule, while the Losers Club remains the glorious, world-saving exception. Skarsgård's performance can now be seen as a study in legacy, a portrayal of an ancient being consciously performing Pennywise as a classic role with renewed gusto after a long hibernation. His menace is layered with the confidence of a proven method, the playful cruelty of a performer who knows his cues and his audience's vulnerabilities intimately. The child actors embody the shock of the first act, their performances tracing the precise moment wonder curdles into terror. The visual design of 1962 Derry likely presents a town at a post-war peak, its ironworks and mills still booming, masking the financial and spiritual rot within with a sheen of industrial vitality. This facade makes the reveals of decay, the crumbling foundation, the weed-choked lot, the stagnant canal, more potent, symbolizing the irreversible sickness growing beneath the economic confidence. Dick Halloran's posting in Derry becomes a critical trial by fire for his shining, a brutal first contact with a concentrated evil that will later help him diagnose the more insidious, slow-burning sickness of the overlook. His survival offers a thread of hope, proving that psychic sensitivity can be a shield as well as a beacon, and that some can walk through this horror and emerge with their sanity hardened into wisdom. Beverly's cameo is a gut-wrenching anchor to the future, a stark reminder that the losers are not waiting in some idyllic childhood, but are already suffering in parallel, their individual crucibles heating up for the eventual forging of their friendship. It creates a profound narrative tension, making the audience wish to warn a character who is decades away from her salvation. Chief Bauer's corruption is systematized, a required administrative function for the town's survival. He is less a villain and more a middle manager of nightmare, his duty to ensure the entity's activities remain within acceptable budgetary and body count limits to avoid outside scrutiny. He represents the banality of evil applied to the supernatural, a man who files reports on horrors he officially denies. The military's archival data hints at a terrifying global pattern, suggesting Derry is not unique but a particularly active hot spot in a worldwide network of thin places where such entities cross over. Shaw's mission is thus part of a larger, hidden Cold War against incomprehensible forces, with Derry as a potential beachhead in a conflict nobody can fully understand. The interwoven plot lines, military, familial, childhood, civic, create a panoramic portrait of a community in the passive act of being consumed. This structure argues that horror is not a singular event, but a distributed process, affecting the general and the private, the powerful and the powerless in interconnected, devastating ways. The symbiosis between town and entity is revealed as a complex economic and spiritual bargain. Derry offers isolation, fear, and periodic sacrifice in exchange for a strange, blighted prosperity and a twisted sense of purpose. Pennywise is the dark engine of the town's economy and identity, the secret founder and mayor of its soul. The carnival becomes the central metaphor for Derry's social contract, a place where you pay with your fear for the fleeting thrill of being alive, only to discover the price is your very sense of safety. The film uses the imagery of rigged games and distorted mirrors to reflect the town's foundational deception, where nothing is as it appears and the house always wins. The Hamlin inheritance is a curse of knowledge, a burden that isolates Will and will later define Mike's entire existence as a librarian of the uncanny. This legacy positions the Hamlin men as the keepers of the town's true, unacceptable history, a role that guarantees a life of loneliness and obsessive vigilance against the creeping amnesia of others. Lily's personalized hauntings showcase Pennywise's artistry, its ability to construct entire traumatic narratives from the faintest echo of guilt. It operates as a playwright of pain, using her memories as raw material to construct a play in which she is both audience and victim, breaking the fourth wall of her own psyche. General Shaw's arc is a tragedy of imperial overreach, a man who believes the tools of conquest can subdue a force that predates and mocks the very concept of empire. His failure is a cautionary tale about the limits of human agency when faced with a predator that considers human history a brief diversion. The production design subtly shows the infrastructure of Derry in a state of optimistic expansion, which makes the presence of ancient, unmovable evil beneath it all the more chilling. New buildings stand on old blood, a visual representation of the town's perpetual cycle of forgetting and rebuilding on a cursed foundation. The soundscape juxtaposes the upbeat, manufactured cheer of commercial jingles and pop music with the organic, wet sounds of the entity's domain, dripping water, scuttling limbs, and distant, unplaceable laughter. This auditory conflict highlights the struggle between the constructed reality of daily life and the primal truth festering beneath. The children's group dynamic likely falters under pressures the losers somehow overcame, perhaps due to a lack of a unifying leader like Bill Denbrough or the corrosive influence of prejudiced parents. Their failure serves to illustrate that childhood solidarity is fragile and that Derry's social poisons actively work to prevent such empowering unions. The hierarchy of sight, from Halloran's clear vision to the children's blurry perception to the adult's willful blindness, creates a social stratification of vulnerability. Those who see too much are marked. Those who refuse to see become the entity's unwitting accomplices, their blindness a form of collateral weaponry. Pennywise's 1962 manifestations would likely embody fears of societal dissolution, the Red Menace, the loss of traditional values, the bomb, but filtered through the personal, visceral fears of its individual targets. It acts as a cultural translator, turning abstract geopolitical dread into immediate, physical terror. The entity's experience of time as a nonlinear landscape allows it to perceive all its past and future interactions with Derry's residents simultaneously. This makes its predation a form of artistic repetition with variation, each cycle a new interpretation of a timeless, terrible symphony. The Bowers lineage of brutality is a direct outcome of the town's pact, a family chosen to enact the human-scale violence that keeps the community fearful and compliant. Their role is to be the visible, comprehensible evil that distracts from the incomprehensible one lurking in the sewers. The technological intrusion of Shaw's team creates fascinating dissonance, as walkie-talkies and Geiger counters fail to register or misinterpret the entity's emanations. This conflict underscores that Pennywise exists outside measurable science, in the realm of psychology, legend, and pure metaphysical malice. Lily's triumph, should it come, is not in killing a monster, but in silencing the corrupted voice of her own memory. Her victory is psychological, a rewriting of her internal narrative that starves the entity of its chosen fuel. This establishes the crucial precedent that to fight it is to engage in a war of self-reclamation. The film might visualize the deadlights not as chaos, but as a horrific library of consumed fears, a sentient archive where every scream, every whimper, Every moment of ultimate despair is catalogued and forever relived. This transforms it from a predator into a connoisseur and curator of human terror. Derry's class divisions offer Pennywise a varied menu. The fears of the wealthy may involve social disgrace and decay of legacy, while the working class confronts more immediate fears of physical want and industrial accident. The entity's omniclass appetite makes it a perversely unifying force in an otherwise divided town. Historical rituals of banishment, hinted at through old symbols or derelict structures, show a pattern of failure that reinforces the entity's perceived invincibility. Each failed attempt becomes part of its legend, a trophy displayed to dishearten the next generation of would-be challengers. The evolving sewer system is a stark architectural metaphor for the town's suppressed collective unconscious, a network growing larger and more intricate as the town's sins and secrets accumulate. It is a literal underworld being constructed in parallel to the surface world, each new tunnel a potential artery for the beast. The climax must be a tactical retreat for both sides, a battle that leaves the entity annoyed but not endangered, and the human characters irrevocably scarred but possessing a fragile, secret knowledge. This outcome preserves the timeline while adding new lore and tragic depth to Derry's history. The specific scars of 1962, a new missing persons file, a disgraced military officer, a traumatized family, directly mold the environment of the 1980s, providing the specific ghosts and rumors that will haunt the next generation. These are the open wounds the losers will unknowingly investigate. Shaw's ethical catastrophe mirrors the real-world horrors of the era, asking if the security of millions justifies the sacrifice of one town's soul. This plotline grounds the supernatural in the all-too-human history of unethical experimentation and expendable populations. Derry's folklore is the town's immune system attempting to reject the truth in a safe, fictionalized form. The stories are antibodies that encapsulate the infection in a manageable narrative. Pennywise likely encourages these tales, as they simultaneously acknowledge and dismiss his reality. The cinematography may employ a crisp, saturated palette that gradually desaturates as characters descend into the horror, losing the vibrant color of the surface world for the monochrome grimness of the entity's realm. This visual journey mirrors the loss of innocence and the entry into a realm where only fear has vivid color. Pennywise's manipulation of the elite is a long-term investment, offering them visions of power or destroying rivals in exchange for their continued stewardship of the town's isolation and its culture of silence. They become shareholders in a nightmare enterprise. The survivor's exile is a life sentence of knowing. For someone like Will Hanlon, the world outside Derry becomes a place of unbearable normalcy, where his truth is the ultimate social liability. His knowledge isolates him within a prison of his own mind. The film could delve into pre-colonial myths of the area, suggesting the entity is a winter spirit or a devouring ancestor from indigenous lore, awakened and twisted by the violence of colonization. This roots Derry's evil in the original sin of the land's theft and desecration. The cost for the 1962 group is their very existence in the town's official memory. They become non-persons, their struggle erased to maintain the consensus reality. This erasure is a fate worse than death for some, a complete negation of their courage and sacrifice. The title's welcome is the bait in a trap, the charming small-town allure that hides the predatory nature of the community. It is an invitation to become part of the food chain, to contribute your fear to the local economy. The deliberate pacing allows the audience to marinate in the social dynamics, to feel the claustrophobia of prejudice and the frustration of institutional silence long before the first balloon appears. This makes the supernatural horror feel like a violent release of a long-building pressure. The film explores the moment when a child's metaphorical monster, the thing in the closet, becomes real, and an adult's rational explanation becomes a pathetic fiction. This collision of realities is where Derry's true horror lives, in the gap between what is felt and what is acknowledged. The ending likely leaves the entity dormant but dreaming, the town embarking on its 27-year process of willful forgetting, and a few carriers of the truth moving into a future they now know is haunted. It concludes not with an end, but with an ominous pause in the cycle, a long exhalation before the next inevitable inhalation of fear. The film frames the Hanlon family's arrival as a necessary plot point within Derry's own ongoing narrative, a method by which the town refreshes its roster of witnesses to prevent its secret history from dying out. Their presence is a controlled variable in a long-term experiment, ensuring the haunting has stewards who cannot fully speak of it. This tragic role transforms them from innocent newcomers into essential components of the ecosystem, their lives given purpose by the very horror that seeks to consume them. Maddie Clement's vanishing acts as a liturgical event within Derry's calendar of fear, a required ritual sacrifice that reconsecrates the town's boundaries and reaffirms the entity's dominion. His loss is not an anomaly but a tradition, a recurring spark that ignites the tinder of collective anxiety in a new generation. The investigation thus becomes a profane pilgrimage, leading the characters not toward salvation, but deeper into the doctrinal heart of the town's true, blasphemous faith. General Shaw's mission operationalizes the supernatural, attempting to apply doctrines of containment and deployment to a force that exists outside material logistics. His perspective represents the ultimate colonization, the desire to map, name, and weaponize the terra incognita of pure fear. This endeavor fails not on a tactical level, but on an ontological one, as the entity resists categorization, turning every sensor and protocol against those who wield them. The legacy of Bob Gray suggests Pennywise engages in a form of aesthetic parasitism, absorbing not just fear but the particular styles and mannerisms of human performance. The clown becomes a perfected meme, an idea of horror that replicates itself with high fidelity across decades, evolving slightly with each iteration to remain potent. This implies the entity possesses a cruel creativity, using humanity's own cultural artifacts as the delivery system for its predation. The film uses the Hanlon's experience as a forensic tool to autopsy the living body of Derry's racism, showing how prejudice is both a social ill and a metaphysical vulnerability. Their systemic othering by the town creates a friction that generates a specific type of fearful energy, one the entity finds particularly resonant and nourishing. Their battle is thus on two fronts, each struggle amplifying the danger of the other. Lily Bainbridge's haunting reveals Pennywise as a master of traumatic recontextualization, capable of taking a single memory and rendering it infinite in its variations of pain. It does not simply replay her grief. It interrogates it, proposes horrible alternatives, and makes her a prisoner in the courtroom of her own regrets. Her liberation, therefore, must come from a verdict of self-forgiveness, a power the entity cannot comprehend or counter. The inevitable dissolution of the 1962 child group serves as a negative image of the Losers Club, highlighting the specific alchemy of personality, timing, and sheer stubborn love that will later create a successful resistance. Their failure is not one of courage but of cohesion, proving that Derry's social toxins are specifically engineered to isolate and alienate potential threats before they can unite. Bill Skarsgård's portrayal in this era could reflect a Pennywise enjoying a post-hibernation renaissance, rediscovering the joy of its craft with the enthusiasm of a veteran actor returning to a beloved stage role. His performance might carry a playful, experimental edge, testing new deliveries and reactions on a fresh audience, making the horror feel both timeless and newly inventive. The visual contrast between Derry's surface and its underbelly is not just spatial but temporal. The town above is locked in 1962, while the spaces below feel archaeologically layered, containing traces of every era the entity has inhabited. This creates a dissonant geography where stepping into a sewer is akin to stepping backwards through centuries of condensed dread. Dick Halloran's tenure in Derry functions as a brutal graduate education for his shining, forcing him to develop psychic defenses against a concentrated, aggressive malignancy. The skills he learns here, how to shield his mind, how to distinguish true evil from mere sadness, become the tools that will later save Danny Torrance's life. His story is one of trauma transformed into hard-won expertise. Beverly Marsh's silent cameo is a powerful moment of dramatic irony, where the audience mourns the years of suffering she must yet endure before finding her tribe. It emphasizes that the Losers' future victory is predicated on this long, lonely period of individual pain, making their eventual union a miracle of narrative timing against the town's oppressive clock. Chief Bowers represents the institutionalization of the town's will to ignore, his police force less a law enforcement agency and more a sanitation department for supernatural fallout. His job is to clean up the mess, file it away, and maintain the pristine fiction of a normal American town. He is a custodian of the lie, and his authority depends entirely on its preservation. The military's global data implies Pennywise may be a singular entity, but its type is not, suggesting a cosmology where such predators exist in various loci around the world. Shaw's mission then becomes part of a desperate, ignorant arms race to capture the first specimen, with Derry as the volatile testing ground. This expands the stakes from local horror to a potential global catastrophe of understanding. The film's braided narrative structure mimics the weaving of a trap, with each storyline, military, familial, juvenile, acting as a strand that, when pulled tight, ensnares the characters in a shared, inescapable net of horror. This technique argues that in Derry, no story is truly independent. All lives are narrative tributaries feeding the same dark sea. The economic symbiosis between town and entity is laid bare, showing how Derry's periods of prosperity oddly coincide with the entity's most active feeding cycles. The horror is thus subsidized, its cost accounted for in a perverse municipal budget that balances financial gain against the acceptable loss of a few citizens. The town is a company town, and the company is fear. The carnival metaphor extends to the entire concept of American exceptionalism that Derry parodies. It is a bright, alluring promise that obscures a rigged game with a brutal price. Pennywise is the ultimate carny barker, selling tickets to a show where the audience is the spectacle and the finale is their own consumption. The Hamlin curse is one of foresight without agency. Will gains knowledge of the monster but lacks the tools or the cohort to defeat it, condemning him to a life of watchful waiting. This transforms him into a sentinel, a man standing guard over a sleeping dragon with only a notebook for a sword, hoping his son will be gifted a better arsenal. Lily's personalized horror show demonstrates Pennywise's function as a perverse psychopomp, not guiding souls to the afterlife but guiding minds to their own deepest wells of sorrow. It is a facilitator of despair, creating the ideal conditions for a psychological breakdown and then harvesting the emotional yield. General Shaw's arc is one of catastrophic paradigm failure. His entire framework of power, hierarchy, technology, strategy, is revealed as a quaint fiction in the face of an enemy that operates on the logic of folktale and nightmare. His defeat is epistemological, a shattering of his worldview that precedes his physical or psychological undoing. The production design subtly shows the 1962 consumerist optimism as a thin veneer, with brand new appliances sitting in kitchens that smell of damp and shiny cars parked outside houses with foundations cracked in strange, spiraling patterns. The modern world is a graft onto a much older, sicker body that is rejecting it. The auditory landscape weaponizes silence as much as sound. The sudden absence of the town's cheerful radio broadcasts or the diegetic music is often the first indicator of the entity's approach. This use of negative sound space creates a vacuum that the viewer's dread rushes to fill, making the horror a collaborative act of imagination. The children's group likely fractures along fault lines the town expertly exploits: parental pressure, social cliques, rumors seeded by Pennywise itself. Their failure demonstrates that the entity is not just a physical predator, but a social engineer, adept at manipulating the very dynamics that could threaten it. The sight spectrum establishes a hierarchy of danger. The fully sighted, like Halloran, are primary targets. The partially sighted children are projects to be corrupted, and the blind adults are useful idiots. The film explores the perilous burden of vision in a world that has agreed, actively, not to see. Pennywise's 1962 forms may incorporate the era's fascination with space and the unknown, manifesting as sinister astronauts or eerie, pulsing alien eggs that tap into fears of invasion. Yet these cultural borrowings are always filtered through a child's visceral, less political imagination. The cold touch of the alien, the darkness inside the helmet. The entity's nonlinear time perception means it likely experiences its future battles with the losers as echoes or premonitions while hunting in 1962. This could introduce a fascinating layer of dramatic irony, where Pennywise's actions are subtly influenced by a ghost of a future conflict it has not yet linearly encountered. The Bowers family is Derry's immune system attacking the wrong target, their violent bigotry a misdirected response to the town's sickness that only worsens the disease. They are a symptom mistaken for a cure, their cruelty providing the entity with cover and convenient scapegoats. Shaw's technology, when it fails, does so in ways that reinforce the supernatural. Radios pick up only childish laughter, Geiger counters spike in empty rooms, and infrared scopes show cold spots that move with intelligent malice. The failure of science becomes the proof of the haunting. Lily's psychological victory, if achieved, establishes a crucial lore point. The entity can be starved at the individual level by severing the emotional pipeline it has tapped. This does not kill it, but it forces it to seek easier, more fertile prey, making self-mastery a legitimate, if small-scale, form of resistance. The deadlights could be visualized as a fractal, recursive prison where each point of light contains an entire lifetime of fear, and within that lifetime, another point of light ad infinitum. This presents its true form as an organized, infinite catalog of suffering, a cosmic monument to its own endless appetite. Derry's geography of fear is zoned. The wealthy old houses on the hill fear the decay of their lineage, the downtown shops fear economic ruin, and the impoverished outskirts fear the predatory neglect of the town center. Pennywise is a universalist, appreciating the unique bouquet of each variety of dread. Evidence of past rituals, charred circles in the woods, stones arranged in forgotten patterns, diaries written in coded despair, litter the town's history like scar tissue. Each represents a broken hope, a historical precedent that teaches the current generation the futility of resistance. The sewer system's expansion in this era is a direct metaphor for the post-war growth of the American subconscious, a burying of trauma and complexity beneath a flushable, convenient infrastructure of denial. The entity is not invading the sewers, it is the reason they were built. The film's climax must balance a visceral battle with a profound sense of inconsequence on the grand scale. The characters may win a breathing room, a delay, but the cost is the realization that they have only negotiated a temporary ceasefire with an eternal enemy. The victory is in survival, not resolution. The aftermath seeds specific locations for the Losers' future encounters. The house on Neibolt Street gains a new chapter of tragedy. The standpipe in the Barrens acquires a fresh ghost story, and the library's archives get a new, mysteriously incomplete file. The 1962 events become the haunting's recent history. Shaw's moral bankruptcy is in seeing the people of Derry as a disposable population, a sacrifice zone for a greater geopolitical good. This mirrors the town's own internal logic, creating a chilling parallel between the military-industrial complex and the supernatural one. Both see individuals as expendable fuel. Derry's folklore serves as a pressure valve, allowing a safe, communal expression of the truth that simultaneously neutralizes it. By turning the entity into a spooky story, the town achieves a collective catharsis without ever having to confront the reality. It is a societal defense mechanism. The cinematographic progression from vibrant, high-contrast colors to a muted, desaturated palette, and finally to the stark, expressionistic shadows of the layers, charts a journey from perceived reality into the underlying nightmare. Color becomes a marker of one's proximity to the true, bleak heart of Derry. Pennywise's dealings with the elite are a long-term behavioral modification program. It offers them their deepest, most secret desires in exchange for their loyalty, gradually turning them into addicts of its dark patronage. They become less accomplices and more dependent clients. The survivor's knowledge is a form of exile. For Will Hanlon, the wider world becomes a place of profound alienation, where everyone is speaking a language of normalcy he can no longer understand. His truth isolates him in a present that feels like a shallow dream. The film could introduce indigenous lore not as a solution, but as a deeper, more tragic understanding. The entity may have been a neutral or even protective spirit of the land that was twisted into a monster by the violence, greed, and fearful Christianity of the settlers. Derry's evil is then a corrupted natural force. The 1962 group's erasure from history is the entity's most effective weapon against legacy. By denying them a story, it ensures their courage inspires no one, their strategies are forgotten, and their sacrifice purchases no future advantage. It is a war on memory itself. The welcome is the lure of community, the profound human need to belong that Derry perverts. It invites you to become part of something, only to reveal that the something is a feeding ritual, and your role is to be the sustenance. It is a betrayal of the very idea of home. The deliberate pacing immerses us in the machinery of daily injustice, the microaggressions, the bureaucratic indifference, so that when the supernatural erupts, it feels like a grotesque but logical extension of the world we've been shown, not an intrusion from outside it. The film resides in the terrifying liminal space where a child's absolute certainty, there's a monster, crashes against an adult's absolute denial, there are no monsters. In that collision, reality itself fractures, and Derry is the permanent scar tissue that forms over the crack. The ending likely leaves the entity wounded but contemplative, the town in a state of amnesiac convalescence, and a handful of survivors carrying a truth that is both a burden and a weapon. It concludes on a note of weary vigilance, the quiet before the next storm that the audience knows is brewing for 1989. The cycle is preserved, but now we have seen another full revolution and understand its mechanics all too well. The film positions the Hanlon family as Derry's natural historians, their outsider status granting them the clarity to document what the indoctrinated locals must willfully ignore. Their journey is less about becoming victims and more about being drafted into a secret priesthood of suffering, keepers of a Gnostic truth that offers no salvation, only the terrible burden of witnessing. This transmutes their personal tragedy into a cosmic duty, a lineage of watchmen stretching backward and forward in time. Maddie Clement's disappearance operates as Derry's morbid coming-of-age ritual, a shared but unspoken trauma that initiates the town's children into the pervasive atmosphere of unspeakable loss. His absence is a negative space that shapes the community's psyche, a permanent vacancy that teaches the crucial lesson that some questions must never be asked. The investigation thus becomes a transgressive act, a rebellion against the town's primary law of silent acceptance. General Shaw's methodology represents the final stage of Enlightenment arrogance, the belief that all phenomena, even the pre-verbal terror of a monster, can be dissected, quantified, and added to a strategic ledger. His arc is the story of that paradigm's grotesque death, as his instruments register not data but madness, and his commands are answered not by soldiers but by echoes of his own deepest fears. He attempts to declare war on a myth and becomes its newest casualty. The Bob Gray narrative suggests Pennywise is not just an imitator but a consummate archivist of human depravity, collecting personas the way a naturalist collects specimens. The clown is its most prized exhibit, a perfect fusion of joyful appearance and predatory intent that it has preserved and curated for over a century. This reframes its shape-shifting not as random horror, but as a curated gallery of mankind's own invented nightmares. The social horror faced by the Hanlons is depicted as a form of ritual preparation, a softening of the spirit through daily micro-terrors that makes them more receptive and more nutritious to the supernatural feast to come. The entity does not cause the racism, it cultivates it, creating an environment where the fear of one's neighbor lowers all psychic defenses against the fear of the absolute other. Their struggle is therefore a fight on two planes that are secretly one. Lily Bainbridge's torment positions Pennywise as a demonic therapist, one who endlessly revisits and re-traumatizes its patient to prevent any healing. Its hauntings are malignant therapy sessions designed to reinforce the core wound, to prove that her guilt is not just a feeling but the fundamental truth of her universe. Her triumph, therefore, must be the ultimate rejection of its diagnosis, a declaration that her story is her own to define. The failure of the 1962 child group underscores a brutal rule of Derry. Collective action is not inherently powerful. It requires a specific, almost mystical cohesion that transcends friendship and becomes a singular organism. The Losers Club achieved this. This earlier group likely succumbs to infighting or betrayal, proving that the entity's greatest defense is the human capacity for distrust and isolation, which it expertly fosters. Bill Skarsgård's performance in this era might convey a Pennywise that is playful to the point of decadence, savoring the post-war abundance of new fears and fresh souls. There could be a languid, unhurried quality to his cruelty, the confidence of a gourmand sitting down to a multi-course meal, knowing he has 27 years to enjoy it. This contrasts with the more frantic, challenged entity the losers will later face. The production design's dichotomy goes beyond surface and sewer. It shows a town where the modern, rectilinear architecture of the 1960s clashes with the older, organic, and crooked Victorian structures. The entity seems to emanate from the older architectural veins, suggesting it is a legacy embedded in the town's foundational aesthetic, a sickness in its original bones that the new facades cannot conceal. Dick Halloran's Derry ordeal can be seen as his residency in supernatural medicine, a harrowing practicum that teaches him to identify a pure, aggressive haunting. This experience directly informs his later, more nuanced understanding of the Overlook's slower, more insidious haunting. He learns in Derry that evil can be a blinding explosion. At the Overlook, he will recognize it as a suffocating, ambient gas. Beverly's fleeting presence is a stitch in time, a narrative thread pulled taut between 1962 and 1989. It reminds us that the losers are not destined heroes, but children currently being prepared in separate, terrible crucibles. Her cameo is a promise of future convergence, making the prequel's isolated horrors part of a larger, if hidden, pattern of assembly. Chief Bowers is the keeper of the town's cognitive dissonance, a man whose job is to enforce a rational order upon a reality that is fundamentally irrational. His corruption is a performance of normalcy, a daily act that reassures the town that the rules still apply, even though they both know a deeper, older rule supersedes them all. He administers the placebo of law and order. The military's interest frames the entity as an anomalous object, shifting the genre momentarily into cosmic sci-fi. This perspective tragically misunderstands the threat as a thing to be contained, rather than a relationship, a symbiotic pact between a place and a presence. Shaw tries to extract the predator from its ecosystem, a folly akin to trying to capture a forest fire in a jar. The film's parallel narratives function like strands of DNA, each carrying a piece of the town's essential code: military ambition, racial tension, childhood curiosity, adult guilt. When they twist together, they form the complete monstrous chromosome of Derry itself. The horror is revealed to be systemic, encoded in every aspect of the town's life. The financial pact between town and entity is one of sublimated tribute. Derry's economic health is the earthly reward for providing a steady diet of fear. This makes every citizen an unwitting employee of Pennywise and Company, their prosperity literally funded by the terror of their neighbors and their own repressed dread. The bookkeeping of damnation is done in ledgers of lumber and iron. The carnival is a metaphor for capitalism's false promises within Derry, a brightly lit machine that turns human emotion, joy, anticipation, fear, into a commodity. Pennywise is the ultimate owner-operator, and the entire town is the midway. The prizes are illusions, and the cost is always more than you intended to pay. Will Hanlon's cursed knowledge turns him into a ghost in his own life, a man present in body, but whose mind is forever in the tunnels, mapping what cannot be mapped. His legacy to Mike is not just a duty, but an exile from the simple, linear world, condemning his son to live in the haunted, recursive time of Derry's history. Lily's haunting reveals Pennywise as an artist of negative space, building its horrors not from what it shows, but from what it implies is just outside the frame of her memory. It paints with erasures and suggestions, making her complicit in constructing the terror by forcing her imagination to fill in the blasphemous blanks. Her fight is to reclaim the canvas of her own mind. General Shaw's failure is a deconstruction of the heroic military leader archetype. His courage becomes stupidity, his strategy becomes suicide, and his mission reveals itself as a sacred pilgrimage to the altar of a god he refuses to acknowledge. He is a knight-errant charging into a dragon's tail, only to discover he was never the hero, but the sacrifice. The set decoration uses the iconography of American optimism, the space-age coffee table, the shiny new refrigerator, as tragic irony. These symbols of progress are stage props in a theater whose play has never changed. They highlight the desperate, failed attempt to build a future on a foundation that is actively, hungrily remembering the past. The sound design may use the growing, pervasive hum of industrial machinery, the mills, the generators, as a constant auditory blanket that masks the subtler sounds of the entity's movement. Only in silence does the true danger become audible, making quiet itself a state of heightened, unbearable alarm. The children's group likely disintegrates because they lack a unifying loo or sacred meeting place like the Barons. Their bond is territorial and fragile, easily broken by adult intervention or the entity's ability to turn their safe spaces against them. This underscores the Losers Club's genius in claiming a geography entirely their own. The hierarchy of sight creates a tragic caste system. The sighted are the prophets, doomed to speak truths no one believes. The children are the initiates, vulnerable and malleable. The blind are the congregation, whose faith is in normalcy, and whose devotion maintains the entity's church. To gain sight in Derry is to be excommunicated from the community of the willfully ignorant. Pennywise's 1962 forms might incorporate the era's nascent fears of systemic failure. The collapsing bridge, the faltering reactor, the trusted doctor with a hidden syringe. It manifests not just as monsters, but as the betrayal of the systems meant to protect, echoing the town's own foundational betrayal of its citizens. The entity's perception of time allows it to use future knowledge as a taunt. It might whisper phrases to Lily, or that won't make sense until decades later, or show them distorted flashes of Mike Hanlon's face. Its cruelty is temporally omnivorous, able to poison the past with the future and vice versa. The Bowers family is presented as Derry's autoimmune disease, a natural defense mechanism that has gone awry and now attacks the town's health. Their brutality is a clean, comprehensible evil that the town accepts to avoid facing the incomprehensible one. They are a scapegoat mechanism made flesh. Shaw's technology, in its failure, becomes an oracle of madness. Screens show static that resolves into staring eyes. Recordings capture not voices but the rhythmic scraping of claws, and radiation detectors point not to uranium but to the cold, sentient void at the town's center. Science becomes the handmaiden of the occult. Lily's potential victory establishes a new lore. The entity can be fired as a therapist. By rejecting its narrative, closing the emotional account it feeds from, she severs the connection. This doesn't kill it, but it creates a small zone of psychic immunity, a sanctuary of self that it can no longer penetrate. The deadlights could be conceptualized as a predatory internet, a network where every captured consciousness is a node forever broadcasting its moment of ultimate terror, contributing to a cacophonous, eternal symphony of fear that is the entity's true body and mind. Derry's economic zones are emotional bioreactors. The affluent areas produce refined anxieties of legacy and reputation. The industrial zones produce raw, potent fears of bodily destruction and mechanical entropy. Pennywise is a connoisseur who appreciates both the complex vintage and the harsh, rustic spirit. The remnants of past rituals are not failures, but necessary parts of the cycle. Each attempted banishment generates a colossal burst of focused belief and fear, a feast that strengthens the entity even as it seemingly fights back. The rituals are part of the feeding schedule, not interruptions to it. The expanding sewer map is a dark mirror to the town's civic planning, a shadow government building its infrastructure in direct opposition to the surface worlds. Each new pipe is a treaty with the darkness, a concession that more waste, literal and spiritual, needs to be carried away from the public eye. The film's climax is likely a victory of containment, not destruction. The characters may succeed in resealing a breach, or forcing the entity back into a deeper hibernation. The win is logistical, a successful emergency response that does nothing to cure the endemic disease. They patch the leak, knowing the pressure will build again. The aftermath directly manufactures the props for the loser's future fears. The 1962 events leave behind the specific clown poster, the exact storm drain, the particular rumor that will later trigger Bill Denbrough or Eddie Kaspbrak. This prequel shows the haunting set dressers at work, meticulously arranging the trauma of the next generation. Shaw's ethical calculus, one town for the nation, is the precise logic of the entity itself, which sacrifices individuals for the sustenance of the whole. His mission makes him an unwitting imitator of the monster, revealing that the desire to weaponize fear is itself a foundational form of evil. Derry's folklore is the town's collective dream, a symbolic processing of the trauma it endures. The stories are the subconscious trying to communicate with the conscious mind in a language it can almost accept. Pennywise likely inspires these tales, enjoying the creative tribute and the way they make its reality simultaneously acknowledged and dismissed. The cinematography may use depth of field to create a constant, subtle unease, keeping the background of seemingly normal scenes slightly blurred, suggesting a hidden world lurking just out of focus, ready to snap into sharp, horrific clarity at any moment. The visual language keeps the threat implicit in every frame. Pennywise's manipulation of the elite is a long-term investment in governance. It doesn't just bribe them, it shapes them into ideal administrators for its feeding ground, selecting for cowardice, greed, and a capacity for doublethink. It is the unseen mayor, the hidden chairman of the board. The survivor's burden is the weight of anachronism. Will Hamlin lives in a present that has moved on, but he is stuck in the past moment of his traumatic knowledge, forever out of sync with a world that has forgotten the battle he still fights every day in his mind. He is a ghost of a future that hasn't happened yet. The film could present indigenous wisdom not as a key, but as a lost context. The settlers may have misinterpreted a warning as a legend, or a ritual of balance as a superstition. Derry's evil is the result of a catastrophic translation error, a spiritual clause misunderstood in a contract with the land. The 1962 group's erasure is the entity enforcing copyright on its own story. It will not allow derivative works or competing narratives. It claims sole authorship of Derry's horror, and any who try to write their own chapter are edited out of existence, their pages torn from the book. The welcome is the predator's mimicry of hospitality, a spider's web decorated to look like a safe harbor. It exploits the fundamental human need for community and safety, turning the very idea of sanctuary into the mechanism of the trap. It is the horror of a smile that has no warmth behind it. The deliberate pacing allows the film to become a study in the sociology of fear, showing how terror is not just felt but organized. Through gossip, through police reports, through parental warnings, through silent glances. The horror is bureaucratized long before it is supernaturalized. The film lives in the rupture between a child's literal truth, "It was a clown," and an adult's metaphorical truth, "It was your grief." In Derry, both are true simultaneously, and the clash of these frameworks shatters sanity. The entity exists in the crack between the literal and the metaphorical. The ending leaves the town in a state of traumatized peace, the entity in a state of digestive slumber, and the survivors in a state of permanent alert. It concludes not with a sunset, but with a long gray twilight, a temporary armistice in a war with no end, where the only victory is surviving to see the next round. The story is a loop, and we have now been shown another revolution in full, terrible detail.